Hey everybody, we are going to be talking about carbon and the molecular diversity of life today. And so when we talk about carbon and we're looking at like molecularly how it acts, we're usually talking about organic chemistry, which is the study of carbon compounds. Carbon is really important because it's so versatile. So it can form up to 4 covalent bonds. It will have a tetrahedral shape when it does so. And it's really cool because it bonds easily to itself, which can form really long carbon chains. Now there are other really important elements that we see in organic molecules. So we've got the carbon, which I said can form up to 4 other bonds, and so you'll see it's got only 4 electrons in its outer shell. Hydrogen has 1 electron in its outer shell, so it can make 1 bond. Oxygen is missing 2 electrons in its outer shell, and then also nitrogen, which is missing 3, so it can form 3 bonds. Now, valence is the sort of the set of rules that we use for building organic molecules. So you'll hear people talk about the valence number, and it has to do with the number of bonds that element can make. Now, hydrocarbons are going to be organic molecules that are made of only carbon and hydrogen. Some molecules are just hydrocarbons, like you see here, and then other organic molecules may contain just really long chains of hydrocarbons and then are maybe attached to other elements as well. So here are some examples of hydrocarbons. You have very simple ones here. So methane, which has 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens. Ethane, you're looking at 2 different carbons and 3 hydrogens. And then ethylene or ethene, which has 2 carbons double bonded to each other, and then only 4 hydrogens because the double bond here means that you have to have fewer hydrogens. So the first thing we're going to look at specifically dealing with organic chemistry are going to be isomers. Now, isomers are compounds that are going to have the same molecular formula, but they will have different structures. Now, those different structures then result in different molecular and chemical properties. So if we look at these 4 different pictures here and say which of these are isomers, what we have to do is count the number of each element. So here we've got ethane and propane. And right off the bat, ethane only has 2 carbons, but propane has 3, so we know that they are not isomers. Next, we can look at butane versus isobutane, and if we look, we've got the same number of carbons and the same number of hydrogens. They're just arranged differently, so these two are isomers. Then we can look at 1-butene versus 2-butene. And so if we look here, we have the same number of carbons and hydrogens. The difference is the location of the double bond. So these are isomers. And then at D, we're looking at rings, benzene versus cyclohexane. And if we were to count everything up, we would discover that because of the double bonds here, that the numbers are not the same, so these are not isomers. There are 3 types of isomers that we're going to look at today. The first are structural isomers, then geometric, and then enantiomers. So structural isomers have differences in the covalent arrangements of their atoms. So again, you have butane with 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons in a line, and then isobutane, which 1, 2, 3, 4, you still have 4 carbons, but you can tell the arrangement is different. Then with geometric isomers, you have the same covalent partnership, but it's going to be different in the spatial arrangement. And what that looks like tends to involve double bonds. So when you have double bonds, there is no flexibility here. So a molecule that like this is going to be actually different than a molecule that looks like this because they can't twist around. So what that kind of looks like is right here. So you've got geometric isomers. The X's just represent pretty much anything other than a hydrogen being bonded to these carbons. So you can see with having both these other groups at the top, this is going to be a different molecule than this one right here where the X's are on different sides. Then finally you have enantiomers. And these are molecules that are mirror images of each other, and they usually involve an asymmetric carbon. So when I talk about mirror images, think of your hands. So your hands are mirror images of each other, so they will match up like this, but not like this. All right, and that is what happens with these enantiomers. So in this example, you can see you've got your two carbons. Each one is bonded to the same four other groups here, but there's a difference in the spatial arrangement, and so they end up being mirror images of each other. So keep in mind that organisms are incredibly sensitive to even very subtle variations in molecular architecture. Thalidomide is an example. So cells can be distinguished between two isomers. So in the case of thalidomide, that would be an effective drug, but it has an isomer that actually causes birth defects. All right, the last topic for today it's going to be functional groups. So we're going to look at these functional groups, and these are a group of atoms that get attached to a carbon skeleton. And now all functional groups are going to have consistent properties within that group, and their number and kind of properties give properties to the molecules that they're attached to. And so they are incredibly important. This is just showing you've got the same basic outline here, a very similar basic outline, but this is testosterone, which is found in males, versus estradiol, which would be found in females. So when we talk about functional groups, you should focus on the structure, the property, and also some examples for that functional group. First, we have the hydroxyl group. And so here we have an oxygen and a hydrogen. Looks like this. It will get kind of tacked on at the end of a hydrocarbon. We call these alcohols. So all their names end in OL. So here we have ethanol. You can see the OL there. This would be the alcohol that's present in alcoholic beverages. And this is a polar molecule because the electrons are going to spend more time near that electronegative oxygen atom. And alcohols can form hydrogen bonds with water molecules, and they are actually really helpful in dissolving organic compounds like sugars. Next, we have the carbonyl group, and this is going to be a carbon double bonded to an oxygen. And we have two different sort of classes of carbonyls. We've got ketones, which is when the carbonyl group is within the carbon skeleton, and then we've got aldehydes, where the carbonyl group is at the end of the carbon skeleton. So here you have acetone, which is the simplest ketone, and you can see that that carbonyl group is in the middle of the carbon chain. And then you've got propanol, which is an aldehyde, and again, you can see that it's an aldehyde because that carbonyl group is at the end of the chain. So ketones and aldehydes can be structural isomers of each other, so they would have different properties. And this is the case right here for acetone and propanol. Again, these two groups can be found in sugars, and they make two major classes of sugars, aldoses and ketoses. Next, we've got the carboxyl group. We call these carboxylic acids. So here you'll have a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, and then also bound to an oxygen and then a hydrogen. The example here is acetic acid. This is what's in vinegar and gives it the sour taste. It is a carboxylic acid, so it does have acidic properties. And so we know that acids will donate those hydrogen ions. Okay, so it will form weak organic acids. Next, we have the amino group. This is going to be a nitrogen with two hydrogens. We call them amines. Here we have glycine, which is actually an amino acid. So you have an amine group on one side, and then you have the carboxylic group on the other. And so this glycine is actually the carboxylic acid and the amino group, so we call it amino acid. And this will act as a base, the amine group, because it can pick up a hydrogen ion from the surrounding solution. Next, we've got the sulfhydryl group. This is going to be a sulfur and a hydrogen. We call this group thiols. And what's really important here is that two sulfhydryl groups can actually react together, forming a covalent bond. We call that cross-linking, and it's really important for stabilizing protein structure. So we'll talk about sulfhydryl groups more when we talk about proteins. Next, we've got the phosphate group. So we call them organic phosphates. You have a phosphorus, and then you've got 4 oxygens. So here you're looking at glycerol phosphate with that phosphate group at the end. And this will contribute a negative charge to the molecule that it's a part of. And let's see, this has the potential to react with water, releasing energy. Then we've got the methyl group, and so this is going to be a carbon that's attached to 3 hydrogens. When these methyl groups are added to other compounds, we say that compound has been methylated. This is going to be really, really important when we look at DNA. So the addition of methyl group to DNA or to another molecule that is bound to DNA is really important for the expression of genes. So we'll talk about that later on in this course when we look at DNA. So for chapter 4, you guys should be able to recognize isomers, you need to know the functional groups, what properties they give to molecules, and what they look like. So don't forget, the structure is very important. And your lecture question for today is, why is it important to understand the properties of the functional groups? All right, guys, that's it for today. Don't forget to send me an answer to the lecture question. Thanks, guys.